Starting a podcast is no easy feat, but getting to over 400 episodes, oh my goodness, we do not see a lot of people who have done that. Today's guest, Lance Cayko, has been podcasting since 2017, and he is an architect, a builder, and quite a bit of other things, including a professor at 2 different universities. He is a very busy person, but he makes time for all of it with intentionality and keeping his calendar exactly how it needs to be. Today, we talk through how he's able to structure his day, how he's able to structure his podcast, as well as what that journey of podcasting looked like for him. Please join me in welcoming Lance to the show. Hello, Lance. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm very excited to chat with you today. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and about your podcast.
Yeah, my name is Lance Cayko. It's actually pronounced like that, Cayko. I'm the only one with that name that's proud to say it, I would say, probably that's been on your show. I'm pretty easy to find. What I do is it depends on the hour in the day. And that's my quickest way to answer it. The long way is sometimes I'm an architect, sometimes I'm a podcaster, sometimes I'm a builder, sometimes a real estate developer, a professor at 2 different universities, a professional fisherman, and a philanthropist.
Wow, that is very busy. How do you make time for all of that stuff?
I do exactly that. I make time. I make time for it. I'm very intentional with my time. I used to tell folks when they would ask me that question, how do you manage all this? And I would say that I schedule everything, but that the framework of that in your mind, when you say that, to me, at least, I was always, it didn't feel as pleasant as it could be, I would say. And so what I do is that I shifted my language to say, I make appointments for everything. I make appointments for my friends. I make appointments for my family. I make appointments for myself, taking care of myself, doing self-care, going to the dentist, getting my ears cleaned, doctor's checkups, doing push-ups, drinking healthy shakes, all that kind of stuff. And then including professional business as well. So I have a calendar that's usually jam-packed, and it looks like maybe I'd be overwhelmed, but in fact, I just have time for everything in that way.
That's a really unique way to do it. Whenever I think about like scheduling things on my calendar, and I've tried to do that for myself, this is just my own personal thing. When I try to do that, I'm like, man, past Alicia didn't know what she was talking about. There's no time for that. But if you create that structure, then it sounds like you're able to make it work for you, right? And making sure that you have that time.
Yeah. Another phrase I like to use with that is like discipline equals freedom. So if I have the discipline to make appointments for myself and allocate time and make space for those things that are important to me and my business and professional and personal wise, then having that discipline equals I have the freedom to do a lot of things and to them, hopefully do them well, and then still maintain a good work-life balance.
How often do you kind of audit that? Because I know that's really important, right? With like keeping up with the things that are important to you, because life obviously changes and certain things might be important to you one quarter, but maybe not the next. How often are you auditing that?
That's a really good question. I think it's the most concise way I could answer that would be now it's down to the semester is when the audit happens. So the last semester in fall of 2023 is when the first time that I taught at 2 different universities in 2 different cities. One is close to us. I'm located in Longmont, Colorado. CU Boulder is about 20 minutes away. But the bigger one, and there's my alma mater, which is further away distance-wise, bigger distance-wise, is North Dakota State University up in Fargo. That was a very intense semester for me, and I'm using semester just as a frame for time. And so what I found is, kind of relating back to the podcast, was I need to consolidate and reassess when I could even give interviews like this, or I can host interviews where I have people on our show. And it's like 9 to 9:30 a.m., Tuesday, Thursday. That's my slot, pretty much. Sometimes Fridays, but mostly that's all I have space for, again, with that. So there's definitely times where I don't have it all figured out, and I didn't last semester. I had to reschedule a lot of people, including myself, for those times that were available. And it's kind of like anything you do. When you teach a course, first time is you get about 50% of it right. second time 75%, a third time about 95. Then you continually just hone in that last 5% as you teach and teach and teach until you maybe get burnt out on the course, honestly.
Right.
So it's the same sort of thing here. Is okay, so this is the second semester in a row where I've had a schedule that I know about. I understand the problems that I have to solve and the lectures I have to give and what's expected of me and all of that sort of thing. That's when I sort of hone in on it. So it's trial by error. There has to be some error involved, but if you don't recognize the error, then you're kind of missing out on the whole lesson.
Yeah. So when did you launch your podcast and how does that kind of fit into your business and your professional life?
2017 is when we launched the podcast. And so we've been doing it for 7 years. It's 2024 now. I think we're almost 550 episodes deep. And the reason why in 2017 was a significant year for us to start the podcast was we started our business in 2010, our first business, architecture, which is F9 Productions. When we got to year 7, and we were truly a startup. We had when I moved out here and Alex moved out here, we had no clients, we had no contacts. We couldn't even show prospective clients a built portfolio because we were laid off from very prominent firms. One in New York City, where Alex was originally working, me in Boulder, in the heart of Boulder, and we only worked for them for like 8 or 9 months before we got laid off due to the Great Recession. And so there wasn't enough time. I think I had enough time at that firm that I was at to design one house. Al was working for a very prominent architect and they were doing master plans for cities. Well, it takes decades to build cities. So we had nothing. And then we started the firm out of basically his dining room. He lived kitty corner to my apartment when he moved down here as well. And so we did what every startup did. That was sort of our garage version of it. And all you're trying to do for those first 7 years is you're trying to survive. It's difficult, especially if you're in the kind of precarious position we were in with our industry and all of that. We got to year 7 and we went, oh, we haven't failed yet. And why that 7 years so significant is, maybe your listeners or yourself hasn't heard this before, maybe you have, is that most businesses fail within that first 7 years. The more you get towards that year 7 and year 8, the less of a chance you have to fail. Because at that point, then hopefully you've established a client base. You've kind of ironed out a lot of issues and problems, and you have a good, strong marketing strategy and all that sort of thing. And so coupled with this societal issue, I think, or just consciousness that was happening at that time, and it's still very present, and I don't like it. And that is, I think I'm a millennial, and I can speak also to the Gen Z crowd here because we employ a lot of Gen Z. My children are Gen Zs. There's something going on in the consciousness right now that is problematic. And I think for those two generations, there's a promotion of victimhood, that it's a good thing to be a victim, that you should embrace being a victim rather than in the sense of like continuing down the victimhood path. And for us, part of it was doing the show was a reaction to that and saying, that's not acceptable. Look at us. We figured it out. And then we wanted to do is give back to those generations that we're most close to in age. And that is, we can do it. Here's how we did it. You can do it too. So the American dream is still alive and well. But at the same time, we're recognizing like, okay, the baby boomers had it very easy. They did. They just had to be born. It was that simple. The world was handed to them essentially after World War II. They were able to buy houses relatively cheap compared to what the prices are, low interest rates. Their purchasing power was much higher and all of that. So what I like to do is I like to make the metaphor of like, okay, baby boomers, you were born with a royal flush. If life is a game of poker, you were born with a royal flush. Gen Z millennials, you were born with a crappy hand of cards, but you're still playing the game. So now your challenge is, Gen Z and millennials, with Inside the Firm podcast, is you have to be very, very careful about how you play your cards. That's all. You're still playing the game, though. You just have to be even smarter and better and more cunning than the boomers were. And you know what? If you get to their level of success and wealth and personal happiness and all of those statistics that you see in the news, if you can do that as a millennial or a Gen Z in that way, you're actually going to be better off than the boomers, because you had to flex all of those mental muscles way more than the baby boomers had to in that kind of way. So that's why we started the show. That's why we do the show. So the first maybe 200 episodes were just Alex and I. We would release a Friday episode. It's called That's the Original Show Inside the Firm. And we basically walk you through what it was like for us to start with all of those problems, no work, no jobs, very difficult like business environment. How did we do it? We bring you literally inside the firm. It's kind of like an executive meeting you get to peek into every Friday. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I wanted to start talking to other business owners and
Mhm.
pull out those stories of grit from them. So people that I have on my show, I like when people aren't born with the silver spoon. I wasn't, certainly. And I can hear about those stories of grit and determination and positivity and success. So that's where the Monday morning show comes in, which is Monday Morning Coffee inside the firm. And I have folks like yourself on the show.
Yes. I love that so much as someone who is excited about being on your show, but also has had to be very resilient and create something from nothing, right? And
Yep.
said, okay, got laid off. What in the world am I supposed to do now as the sole financial provider for my family? How am I going to take this to the next level and take care of what I need to take care of and not let that stop me from moving forward, right? And I think it's really interesting you mentioned like the victimhood, and I feel like we see a lot of this with like hustle culture of like just go 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 go. And yes, I feel like there is a time and place for that, while also baking in time, like we talked about at the beginning, for self-care and making sure that you don't get burnt out, right? So I think it's this balance that our generation has had to really figure out because our parents didn't teach us that at all. So we had to figure
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah, 100%. But that's kind of indicative of, I think, of any parent. There's a theme and a law that I like to think about and have in my consciousness as much as possible. And that's a law of polarity, right? So
Mm.
you can't have a negative without positives. You can't have positives without negatives. That's the way the universe exists as we know it today, right? Electricity doesn't work without that. If there's night, there has to be day. Very pretty yin yang, that sort of thing, right? So I think when I put it in the context of parents, I go, man, there's this. I know a lot of people my age talk about how their parents did this or they didn't do this, and then therefore they do that or this. And I think it's just a natural reaction to that. And then all of a sudden, my children, for example, do the opposite of what I'm suggesting. And I think it's just how it works.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I tell my husband that all the time. I'm like, our kids are gonna grow up and they're gonna be like, ah, you did it wrong. We're just doing the
Yeah.
best we can. No one has it figured out at all. So you said for those first 2 years you had done it with your co-founder and you guys were just kind of getting into it and just like behind the scenes kind of stuff. Did you find that when you shifted, and this is something that's kind of a running theme on the podcast that we've seen, of people kind of tweaking their podcast, not changing it in any way, not
Mm-hmm.
changing the mission, but just
Mm-hmm.
honing in a little more for a clearer message, right? Or in a clearer direction for them. Did you find that you either saw an increase in downloads or maybe a shift in the types of people that were listening?
Well, yeah, definitely. It's that's pretty obvious. Yeah, it increased the number of downloads we were getting per month and viewership. It increased the breadth of our audience, which was absolutely 100% a goal from the backside of it. And I think the unexpected thing that it did for me personally is I was bringing on guests such as authors and folks that were business coaches, or they had good ideas, things you should look at, watching documentaries on YouTube or whatever else. That was a surprising part for me. And the most particular one, the one that's most poignant and that's been really directional for me, is having certain authors on. I just had one on yesterday. His name was James Bond. I think his episode is going to air in the next week or two. And he has this book. It's called The Brain Glue. And I've multiple times in the show, we're halfway through the show, halfway through the interview. And I say to them, hey, I'm just going to buy your book right now. And then I'll buy it like halfway through because I'm just so convinced. And it's not for every author. Some authors I'm like, yeah, that one's really not for me. So it's expanded my consciousness and places I go to learn more things. And there's a lot of providence involved with it, I feel like, or I'm like, there's a reason why God intentionally put me in contact with this person. I was supposed to interview this person. And the timing every single time is almost uncanny. For example, like there was another book that I read last year, and I was going through some stuff personally where a lot of women in my life have confused sympathy with empathy. They think the two are the same. These are just only women in my life, right? I'm not speaking about all women. And they say, you don't have any empathy. And I'm like, so I read a book. It was called Train Your Empathy. It was from an author, again, that I interviewed. And it changed my life because and she broke it down. The author was a female. And she broke it down in the book so clearly and concisely, like, this is sympathy and this is empathy. And she started to describe the difference between the two. And she started to describe the behavior characteristics that you would have if you are truly an empathetic person. And I got done with the book and I go, oh my God, I have a lot of empathy. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a pat on the back here and say, and then also at the same time, re-clarify with people that accuse me of not having empathy of like, nope, I think you're confusing it that I don't have a lot of sympathy. And frankly, I don't. Like, I'm happy to embrace that part of it because it ties back into that sort of victimhood consciousness, right? Where it's like, I don't really have sympathy for you in that situation. I have empathy. I dedicate hours and hours of my life per week to try to help you or other people out who listen to the show in giving you strategies or pumping you up and being positive about it. Like, yeah. So then it even ties into this whole law of polarity thing. Is like, I was at a dinner a couple months ago with my kids and I took them out to eat. We're sitting there and I go, hey guys, just guess. When do you think I get more excited if something bad happened to me or something positive happened to me? And they go, positive, of course. And I go, nope. I am now 40 years old, and it took a lot of negativity in my life, experiencing a lot of negativity in my life, and then seeing the positivity that comes afterwards because of the negative thing for me to, it was a maturity, like leveling up. And I said, I get most excited when something negative happens, something bad happens. And they're like, what? And then I explain the law of polarity to them, and I go, I actually get nervous, guys, if it's just good, because I go like, oh, it feels like there's got some balance is coming. Feels like the rug is going to get pulled out. Feels like something bad is coming. And it usually does in that kind of way.
I agree 100%. And for the listeners, I'm over here nodding. But like, I talk a lot about this with my friends where I'm like, the biorhythms of life, there are those ups, there are those downs. And I can actually, from looking at my adulthood, I can see where those highs have been and then kind of estimate about where those lows are going to be to better prepare myself for what is to come, which that helps me cope with being able to like, okay, I know that something bad is going to happen in the next year. What are the areas in my life that I need to really nail down and get clear on before I go through that bad thing? Because I know it's coming. And so like working with an energy management coach to help me support with the way that I'm showing up in arguments or the way that I'm showing up to certain things that trigger me. And so working through those issues and through those things to better be able to cope with. And then a year later, my dad passed away. So like these things, like exactly what you're talking about, like those do prepare us for what is to come and what is going to happen next. And yes, when there's always good, there's going to be something that's going to happen. And it's up to us to move through that, right? To not let it stop us from living.
Exactly. It's like being prepared, right? That's why it's so stupid. Like I've been trying to get my brother, and he's actively trying to do it, is just live a more cleanly, orderly life. I totally get they have 3 kids. They are both basketball coaches. In addition to being parents, is an outdoorsman, a big hunter, a big fisher. His wife, God bless her, her one fatal flaw is she did not grow up in a household where like there was daily chores and it was pretty much a mess of a house sort of thing. But that's the opposite of what my brother grew up in. It was very much like cleanliness is next to godliness type of a mentality, right? And why I'm saying that is like, that's one example, a tangible example of how to be prepared for if things go awry in your life. If you're organized in your house, if you're clean in your house, if something goes really bad, then at least you're not sitting in a space that is the energy and the frequency of it is sort of chaos. So at least if something externally bad is going wrong, at least you still have a place of sanctuary that has that kind of frequency of clarity about it.
Yeah, almost like compounding on, okay, bad things are happening. And then also my to-do list and also the house is a mess. Like it just compounds on itself. So to be able to relieve some of those compounding features and things in our life, I think is really important. When you started interviewing people and you mentioned this with like your workflow and how you're structuring your time beyond the scheduling, do you have like a team that helps you with your podcast to help support that? I know some people do. Some people are like, I'm just going to do it myself. Or do you tend to go with like minimal editing? What does that style kind of look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's just like anything, right? Like when you start out a podcast, like there's some figures I want to give people if they're ever thinking about doing it. Is if you make it past 50 episodes, I think you're automatically in the top 2% of podcasts in the world. And then if you get up to like 100, I think you're in the top 1.5, and it just keeps going like that. So it's a really long game to play. And I think you can start up a podcast just like we did with a Yeti microphone, like we did at the beginning. And then we didn't even film at first. We brought in the GoPros maybe 4 or 5 years ago once we built a new office and everything like that. So what I'm getting at was like very startup, very lean. And so I think that approach really helped us out right away. So I didn't have a team. It was me doing all the audio, me doing all the, and then eventually the video, cutting the shows up and all of that. When we started the Monday morning show, it was hard to get guests right away. And another tool that I use that I recommend, I just recommended it to my girlfriend actually. And she's been crushing it because she started her own show called Walk With Me recently. And she was like, I love my guests. And she did it just like me, where she was like reaching out to friends, colleagues, other business people that were local to our office. And those get, a lot of people I don't think are ready to be on a show like this. Like they get all nervous and stuff. And for me, I'm like, that's such a foreign concept because I've been doing it for so long. I forgot about it. So that there's an example of, I had lack of empathy on this because I just forgot like how, for me, it's fun. I love going on shows like this. And so the recommendation is like, I love places like Podmatch. That's how you and I met. And if you're on Podmatch, you want to be on shows, or vice versa, you want guests and stuff like that. That has 100% streamlined the whole process for me, because then I can get like, for you, I'm sure you have a nice bio written up. I can copy and paste that into my Word document for show notes, tweak it, tailor it to my audience. There's questions on there that every guest is like ready to answer. I can copy and paste those, tweak them how I want. It just makes it so like a 30-minute interview, the prep time, I don't even know, it just cuts it down by, I think, at least 50%. I mean, something like that. And then there's having templates set up in Adobe Premiere. That's where I cut the shows, having the intro and outro. And then after you get built up enough, for us, the download number of the threshold of where we finally were able to monetize it. And I'm not making a living off it. It's paying for itself, basically. Now it's just sort of a way for us to advertise, be public figures, put our voices out there, be heard, hear other people, interview interesting people like we talked about with the authors and all of that sort of thing. But 5,000 downloads. Once we got the 5,000 downloads per month, by the way, 5,000 downloads per month. We're at about 20 now. And when we got to the 5,000 download mark, I said, okay, I feel confident enough to go after some sponsors and see if we can get them to sponsor the show. Well, we do our ad copy, kind of traditional stuff. And once we were able to do that, then I was like, okay, I think we can pay somebody to push out the shows, contact guests when it goes live, put together some graphics for us. And so now recently it's my friend Bill McCarthy. He's an audiovisual expert, and he does all of that work for us. So it is more of a team effort now in that sort of way, but that's the process.
I really love that you shared that journey. Sometimes people kind of skip, right? They're like, oh yeah, no, it's great now. Everything's fine. It's like, oh, yeah, but there's a lot that goes into it. Like, I know for sure. So thank you for sharing all of that and giving those specific numbers too, because most podcasts are not actually going to get to 5,000 downloads a month. And so you have to be super strategic and make sure that who you're talking to is not such a broad audience. If you're looking to get a specific type of sponsor and you want to make sure that you're pulling in not just the podcast downloads, but also your social audience, like there's so many nuances to that sponsorship. So appreciate that so much.
Yeah. And consistency is key. That's the other big thing, is like you need to commit to some kind of interval. 1 a month, 1 every 2 weeks, every other week, once a week, 2 a week, something like that. You have to commit. I would record like 4 or 5 podcasts before you launch. That way you have a bank and you have some breathing room and all of that. But you got to really make a commitment. And if you can make that commitment and you get past those 50, it'll get easier. You'll start to not hate your voice after about 100. That's a real thing, right? And so like my voice doesn't bug me whatsoever. Like it was a big personal hurdle for me, because people would tell me, like my girlfriend, there's like some days we don't see each other and she goes, oh, I watched a fishing video of yours today. I'm like, oh, that's cute. Why'd you do that? Like, you're not that big of a fisher. Like, she'll go with me. And she's like, I just needed to hear your voice. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's not a screeching voice, right, apparently. But it took me about 100 episodes. And then the other thing seems like about 100 episodes too, is I really highly encourage everybody, if they start a podcast, and like, I would actually listen to yourself for the first 50, maybe even the first 100. But the first 50 for sure, you will notice all the stuff you hate, all the prepositions that are unnecessary, and you'll become a better speaker. if you can become a better speaker and you aren't nervous talking to people, it is such a powerful talent to have. I just think being able to go up and glad hand with strangers, especially if you're running a business and you are the face of it, you are having to obtain clients, or maybe you're selling products, you have to talk with vendors that intersect with you. It'll just make you a better person and be able to, and a better leader.
Yes, agree 100%. And that was and still is a thing for me as well. Even though I'm over 100 episodes, I've probably recorded
Yeah.
200 between all of my podcasts at this point, and I still do not listen to my show because I do not like the sound of my own voice. But my friends listen and they're like, "Oh, that one was great, awesome, love that."
Nice.
That's great. But
Mm-hmm.
I do agree there are ones where I will maybe spot check something, or I will go back to listen because I'm looking for something specifically. And I realize that I say, and so quite a bit. That's something that I need to work on. And I almost just said it again.
It happens. It happens.
It
Yeah.
does. Well, Lance, this has been such a fun conversation, and I really appreciate all of the insights that you've brought today. If you could tell everyone where they can find you, listen to your show, and connect with you, let you know how much they enjoyed this episode.
If you want to keep up with anything we're doing architecture and building wise, you can go to f9productions.com, sign up for our newsletter. We send out a newsletter every month. It's pretty fun. And that if you want to listen to the show, go to insidethefirmpodcast.com. We're on all platforms, Spotify, YouTube, even iTunes, all that good stuff. If you want to connect with me personally and professionally, I will accept an invitation for that for anybody. Even if you're somehow an AI spam bot listening to this show, you can go to LinkedIn and just type in Lance, Lance, last name Cayko, Cayko. That's Cayko. Send me a request. I will link in.
All right, perfect. And we'll make sure that we link all of that in the show notes in the description to ensure that people can connect with you. Thank you so much, Lance.
Thank you.